Hello, everyone. Welcome, and really a huge thank you for joining us today in this discussion on building happy and effective data teams. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Tinybird, and I'm very excited to be with this group of people. So just some housekeeping. This webinar will last roughly 45 minutes. After both myself and the panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack to answer some of your questions in the Effective Teams channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the QA feature in Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Sebastián Pérez Saibi, and today I'm joined by Blanca Garcia Hill, Ellen Koenig, Tiffany Jaksha, and Alasdair Brown, an exceptional group of data leaders who will share their experiences and insights on building high-performance data teams with us. I'll briefly introduce myself, and I will ask each one of you to take a minute to do the same thing. So as I said, my name is Sebastián. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm currently a senior data manager at Shopify, leading the organization responsible for merchant analytics. I'm originally from Colombia, and I have spent the last decade and a half building data products and high-performance, globally located data teams across industries such as commerce, healthcare technology, and finance. When building data products, I care about users and interoperability, and I could not be more excited to learn from all the panelists today. I'll now give it to you, Blanca, to go next and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sebastian. Hi, everyone. My name is Blanca, and I am currently a lead analytics engineer at a startup called Topi. It's based in Germany, and it's remote. I live in London, and I've literally been there for a week. And prior to that, I was working at the BBC, where I actually transitioned from being a software engineer to working in the data platform team. And within the data platform team, I worked on building highly reliable pipelines. I work in a data warehouse. I work with our data visualization. I'm very closely with our our data analytics and data science teams. And I'm super excited to be here because I'm the first hire in the company that I've just joined at Topi. And I will be looking to learning from the rest of the panel and their experience as well. And I'm going to pass next one to Alasdair.
Thank you. So, hello, I'm Alasdair Brown. I started in the big data space about 10 years ago at British Telecom with a focus on cybersecurity, building real-time cyber analytics platforms. And from there, I moved to Cloudera as a solution architect, helping customers across a range of industries take advantage of low latency, real-time streaming tech, mostly to improve operational intelligence. Today, I'm at a growing startup called Tinybird, which is focused on making real-time systems accessible to a wider audience and going beyond just delivering a bag of bits to make real-time work as a wider piece of the data strategy. I've helped kickstart Tinybird's UK customer success team, and I've just recently changed to help build out our global developer relations function. And I'll pass over to Ellen.
Yeah, I'm based in Berlin. I'm currently a lead data engineer at ThoughtWorks, a consulting company. I rejoined ThoughtWorks 6 weeks ago before I built up the data engineering team at the British South African startup in the public transport space. And I've been in data engineering now for pretty much exactly 8 years. And I've often been the first data engineer in the team, so I've had a lot of opportunity to build up data engineering teams and different data teams. And I'm really excited because this is a topic I'm really passionate about. So I'm really excited to discuss with all the panelists here. And I pass over to Tiffany.
Hey everyone, my name is Tiffany Jaksha, and I'm currently a data science engineering manager at Vox Media. I'm leading the data product team, and we're blending together engineering and data science to develop and deliver machine learning models and data solutions that are really meant to help our stakeholders scale and understand the data in our ecosystem. Prior to my work in data science, I was also a software engineer, and I've specialized in cloud engineering and DevOps. And I think this panel is going to be really exciting because we all are really passionate about driving and creating amazing teams and getting the most out of our data solutions. So I'm looking forward to it.
Amazing. Well, thanks everyone for the introductions. So let's go to our conversation, our main event for today. So every data manager you'll ever talk to is interested in building high performance data teams. So high performance, like the ideal of high performance, or as we're calling it in this panel, data team happiness, depends on multiple factors. And three of them that are salient are team composition, scope of your work, and also strategic alignment or strategy. And one could even go as far to say that all happy data teams are alike, but each unhappy data team is unhappy in its own way, stretching really, really far. Leo Tolstoy's famous opening quote. So where do we even begin to tackle data team happiness? So let's break down each of these aspects from the perspective of this group of panelists. I'm going to prompt you with some starting questions, right? So talking about team composition, one of the things that comes to mind when you're thinking of your data team and when you're starting is like, how do you decide it's time to hire someone, like to look for your first hire? And I'd love to get some perspective, perhaps from Blanca, on some thoughts that you might have there.
So I have some insight based on my recent starting my recent role at Topi. I am their first data hire. So I have joined a team of I think it's 10 engineers, okay, working in the main product. And the reason why they hired someone with my skills is because they realized that they were having some very specific needs and related to data, and there were some kind of gaps in the skill sets that they had. So they were thinking, what are these gaps? And actually, I've seen that they had kind of this internal document with a discussion about it. There are these things that have emerged with related to data. There's different functions in the business that needs to use data. And we need someone that understands it, has experience, and can add to what the team is building. They didn't want someone to kind of build things entirely on their own. Data is a highly collaborative process. Okay, so I am embedded in the tech team, and my background in software engineering and systems engineering is super beneficial because I can understand and I can kind of follow on the team's process, okay, and add to that, okay, while learning from them. So I think that was kind of the reasoning behind the first hire. Before that, when I was at the BBC, I was an engineer and transitioning into working in the data platform. So I was just building software and I didn't care about the data. And then all of a sudden, kind of data became the main thing. And I can relate to that almost like as a team transition. It wasn't kind of a first hire, it was like a whole team. And it took me quite some time to understand the differences. And once I kind of begin seeing things from a different angle, I was hooked. Okay, so I would love to hear, what, for example, Ellen, what you have to say, because you said you built multiple data teams. So I'm very, very curious.
Yeah, from my experience, there are two prerequisites that really need to be in place to make sense to hire data people. One is obviously there needs to be some data that you want to base on. So I've seen or heard quite a few frustrating cases from friends where they were hired as the face data folks and there was no real data to work with. And the other, maybe less obvious prerequisite is, as Blanca mentioned, there needs to be a use case. So it must be either some internal use case, maybe you want to get analytics data and you have a specific business intelligence need or something, or you want to build a product around data, maybe a smart recommendation system or something that's client that's part of your product or client facing. And only if these two things are given, it makes sense to hire, do your first hire. And maybe not just one hire, because as Blanca mentioned, it's really hard for one data person in particular to just sit around and do everything, but really hire a combination of people that blend that leads to what you mentioned, Sebastian, about team composition. It's really important to get that right from the beginning.
That's awesome. I really appreciate those perspectives, and I empathize a lot with that sensation of like really understanding what the company needs in order to identify what that first hire needs to do. Because in multiple cases, you're just to use an example, asked to do machine learning, but there's no good data acquisition, right? And I think many people in this room have been in that situation. So it's super important, like to look for your first things to look out for your first hire, or if you're transitioning internally from software into data. So this is pretty fascinating start to our conversation. Let's go a bit deeper, right? So let's see. Okay, we're setting up our team. So what kind of competencies are important for you when you look at your first teammates? So essentially, I'm really talking about like getting a team culture, right? Like how does competencies affect how you think about your culture? And I would love to hear from Tiffany and what you think about this question.
Yeah, I love it because it's a good segue into, I guess it's just like it wraps together a lot of the points that Blanca and Ellen made about understanding the use case and then going from that use case to identifying where the gaps are. Because, you know, if the better you understand the work, the more you're like, okay, well, now I need these sets of like tools or someone with that experience, maybe not the tool set, but maybe the experience. So like, I can start to identify like the level of seniority, the skill sets, that background, and then from there make the assurance that your team is not going to get stuck in any place, at least technically, because you can have like a really great team. Like I've seen people hire really great people, but then when they get stuck, you know, those people aren't living up to their potential. They're not able to release things, and then you know you're kind of still spinning your wheels in the same place. In terms of competencies, I try to look for someone who is really curious in the interview process, because I know that when it comes to building data teams, you know, you're really trying to solve a lot of problems and look at various dimensions of data, you know, not just how you're collecting it, but how do you transform it? How do you make it a sustainable process down the road for your stakeholders, whether, you know, you're a data platform team and someone's going to consume that pipeline to, you know, create machine learning models, or you're the machine learning model team and you're thinking about, well, how do I take a you know, centralized data set and make it usable for, you know, make it clean and usable and very specific for what the problem that you're trying to solve. So I think that curiosity tends to promote the hiring of people that are willing to take like personal responsibility and leadership over the use cases and the problems that you're trying to solve. And I think that's always a really great addition for like any team culture that's trying to solve, you know, these very like data specific questions and answers, because at the heart of it, it gets to be a lot of scientific questions as well. And I think that's something that tends to be a little bit different, or at least one of the more exciting parts of data, I would say, for anyone who's you know, maybe transitioning or trying to, you know, get more insights into what working on a data team is like.
Absolutely. That resonates a lot, Tiffany, like curiosity and like being driven to answer these hard questions is extremely important. And then like that coupled with some technical competencies of either maybe skills from the software side, or perhaps skills from the social sciences, or other types of um, areas that add value to analyzing data and having like an understanding of the real problems that are being solved is extremely important. So I really appreciate that. And I think what I wanted to ask Alistair a question that is heavily related to this one. So let's say we're thinking of these competencies to set up our team. So one very important thing that is tied to this is, how do you think about ensuring that everyone on your team has a path to grow, right? Because assembling a team, especially in times like this, where the economy is shrinking, not everyone is hiring massively. So how do you think about growth in your teams, and how does that relate to their competencies and everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So I'm not going to touch on the economics side of things. That's, not my area. But like going back a little bit to what Tiffany was saying, like curiosity, could not agree more. And I think what you find when you go when you look for curious people is you end up with like super flexible skill sets. Especially in an early stage company, and you're talking about your first hire or just like your first few hires, you don't have a super clear idea of bam, bam, bam. This is what you're going to be doing. This is what your tomorrow looks like. These are the tools you're going to be using. This is what you need people who are like, yeah, I've got experience doing X, Y, and Z, but hey, if we don't do that, yeah, I'll pick up what this next thing is. I will find that and I will do that. And that's kind of necessary, right? And that kind of leads into the culture bit, right? You need a culture that supports flexibility, that allows people, it especially gives people to feel safe to fail, right? If you're going to be the first hire, you are going to fail. It's inevitable, right? And if you don't feel like you can fail, you're not going to be curious. You're not going to go and try out something new. You're not going to be willing to take on the responsibility of something new that you've not done before. So you really need to look for, people who are curious, who are flexible, and who are willing to fail, that accept that, yes, I will fail and I'm okay with failing, and I will take that as a learning opportunity and do it differently, hopefully the next time. I mean, you can always try it again, but
That's awesome. I could not agree more. I think that like all of this shows how much care you need to focus on assembling your team, right? It's not only about hiring folks with the right skill sets. It's about thinking about your culture first. It's also about ensuring that there's curiosity, and that on itself is a very, very important ingredient. But it's not the whole story. I wonder if anyone would like to add anything, because I would also love to move to another area, but like I see that perhaps Ellen would like to add something.
Yeah. One thing when we talk about growth, one thing I've had great success with was hire people that are slightly below, in experience, slightly below what maybe we were thinking of, because then they have kind of a built-in growth path. It's especially in early stage startup, when, as Alistair said and Tiffany said, they're really curious and they're eager to take on a variety of roles. It's great to give them a little bit of growing room built in, so that they have the opportunity to take on stuff quickly, and then discuss with them if they want to take on more opportunity. Because especially when it's an early team, that's probably the most exciting thing for them, to really have that growth opportunity, rather than maybe the super fancy salary or the set career path that you can offer them.
Spot on. I think the opportunity to stretch is fascinating and extremely important. And I see also that Blanca has something to add as well. So please.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think when Alistair was talking about the safety to fail, that's probably what kind of fueled my transition. And I was in an environment that it felt okay going from a senior software engineer into kind of like a data engineer, and then going to like data warehouse and subsequent things. It just felt like a really good environment. And it's also been my experience in my first week in the tech team that I'm in. It's just that, like, that's kind of an overlapping skill set perhaps with like building tech teams, healthy tech teams. And related to the career paths, one way also to kind of the hiring is good to kind of give people room for growth. But once they're in, I think in data, you need to, if you're setting up a career path framework for the development of your engineers in your company, be mindful that data science, data analytics, they're kind of different career path frameworks to software engineers. So be mindful and put the effort into that, because when people are very curious, they're also looking for growth and new challenges and so on. So invest in that as your teams are expanding, and don't let it wait and like bite you, because otherwise you might be losing people, and it's just because they're just kind of very curious and they're almost like restless, wanting to kind of find opportunities to stretch.
That's spot on. Investing early, even if it's a simple career framework, but investing in clarity around the roles that you're actually offering people to do, while allowing for opportunity to stretch is the key combination, because there is this tendency in data to do or want to do everything, and that might dilute the efficacy of the initiatives that you have in front of you. So like that is super interesting. So yeah, like those distinctions also between data analytics, data science, or data engineering come to play there as well. So that's pretty fascinating. So this actually ties. It's a good segue to our next topic, and it's the scope, or essentially like, okay, now we have a team, we're putting it together, but we have a team for a purpose, and that purpose is typically achieving some objectives or driving some key indicator forward, right? So essentially, how do we start driving this team to success? So like what I'd love to figure out is if we can talk about some practices that you introduce early in your teams or for yourselves, so that everyone in your data team is aligned towards achieving these objectives or reaching that scope. And I'd love to hear from Ellen, that perhaps has some thoughts about this.
Yeah, one of the practices I installed is when I was setting up a new data team was to have these bi-weekly syncs with the main stakeholders. And there would just bring in the priorities for the upcoming 2 weeks, all the stuff they submitted at a talk, all the stuff that came in from the roadmap, and just get their feedback on whether they think this is really the most important things to work on in the 2 weeks. And usually this wasn't even controversial. Usually that was a surprisingly uncontroversial discussion where they just agreed with what we prioritize. But sometimes they would surface some interesting things that I haven't thought about or that occurred that they hadn't submitted yet. And so that was really productive so discussion, and that made sure that the next 2 weeks would be relatively smooth.
Absolutely. I think that setting up those stakeholder conversations is critical and brilliant, and really treating them as extremely important source of information to your team is key to ensuring that whatever your team is doing is driving objectives for the company. And like, if not, having quick opportunities to realign. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Ellen, and I know that Tiffany would like to also pitch in. So.
Yeah, I'd love to highlight on what Ellen said about communication. I think that there's a big part of success that doesn't happen unless there is someone advocating and sort of making or paving the way for conversations around data. Otherwise, you run the risk of sometimes becoming a silo or being like, this new data team or a data team that's getting spun up, and in an organization that's typically used to SRE, used to software engineering, but maybe not so literate or as literate in the data space. Unless it's like, a company that has data as its main business, you would expect that. But, you're not always guaranteed that in every data team setting. So I think one thing that I like to introduce early on for anyone in my teams, and I think this is also a good onboarding exercise, is to get used to talking about the work. Talk about even something as simple as like having a little show and tell, and opening it up to the company, or even like having a conversation around what is the difference between data engineering and data analytics and data science? What are we trying to do as a team? Those conversations and discussions go a long way, because it also shows that you're there to help. And I think that's something that helps unify different kinds of teams too, especially if you're a data team that is a stakeholder or a contributor to other teams that are maybe not data related, or their main business is software engineering or building out another product. So that's a practice that I like to introduce early on in my team. Be known for something as a data team. Be clear about why you exist as a team. What are you trying to achieve, and really drive that home.
That's fantastic. Like communicating the outcome of the work early, transparently, getting feedback, getting it out there, is a super important, almost a feature of a data team. And when it's absent, I think of it as a feature, because when I notice that a data team is not communicating what they're doing, it's extremely easy to silo, and a siloed data team is not a very effective data team because it's disconnected from the company's objectives. And Alistair, I know that you want to add something else as well to this one.
Yeah, well, on a very similar theme, right, of communication, I think a lot of people end up seeing Jira, or other project management tools are available, but Jira, using Jira and tickets and Kanban boards and daily stand-ups as a crutch for communication, of going, well, that we're communicating. I've stuck it on a ticket. I've raised a ticket. I've commented on a ticket, and they go, I've communicated. That's all I need to do. Or a 15-minute conversation at the start of every day where it's just ticket, bam, ticket, bam, ticket, bam. That's it. We're done. We finished communicating. Doesn't work. That's not really communicating. So it's not like I don't have a particularly great, you should do this instead. It's more, if you notice that most of your conversations are just your daily stand up and then your team doesn't talk anymore, you've got a problem. You're not communicating effectively. And you need to look for something else. That may be different for different teams, but you need to look for something.
That's spot on. I think that I really love that fact that, yeah, like sometimes we use rituals as crutches for communication, and I think that rings very true, and especially important for data teams that have a component of doing data analysis. Like, I think almost every data team has a part that is doing product analytics for themselves at the very least. Even if you're building a data product, even if you're building a machine learning product, that's beautiful and it's highly technical. If you're not able to communicate that impact, it's not going to be as powerful. So like developing that muscle on communication is super important. And I'll just share super briefly something that I typically try. I'm not saying is the holy grail, but something that I advocate for is data storytelling in a format where, for instance, you use a slide deck, and essentially you say, in a slide you have, I don't know, 200 characters of text and maximum one very, very simple visualization to communicate something that you learned this week. And that constraint really forces all of us to think of like, hey, how am I communicating? What am I communicating? And how can I tweak that and improve that over time? And also it creates an internal ritual for your team to give and receive feedback about how they're communicating. So it becomes almost also a tool for reflection and feedback, and maybe PR reviews, etc., that are associated to that. So that's a strategy that I wanted to share that I've used in the past for the group. Awesome. So this ties very, very nicely to one other side of data teams, and it's that it's very tempting in many organizations where I've been, or in my experience, to receive a lot of ad hoc requests, right? Like, we have a data team, they're close to the data, they must know something, or they must help us answering questions that we have. So a lot of ad hoc requests come our way, and if we take them first in, first out, they might derail our capacity to I don't know, build a data product, advance the technical roadmap, advance the data roadmap. So I wanted to ask the group and perhaps everyone, right? Like, how do you balance competing priorities? How do you say no effectively? Or how do you deal with ad hoc requests? And Blanca, please kick us off.
So I found a variety of strategies. So when I was at the BBC, there was a point that there was a new data team that spun up, and it was the data visualization team. So I took the lead of that team, and I had a group of people kind of bringing them together. And the first thing is kind of echoing what Tiffany and Ellen mentioned, is kind of communicating what your team is doing so that people understand what things that you own. And perhaps that also kind of directs, to you the right questions, but then also telling them why you have come up to be a team, okay, and the team for themselves to understand why are they there, okay. The next, so if you're kind of having those brainwater conversations with your stakeholders, there should be not a lot of surprise, I think, about requests. I think you're already kind of preempting the ground that nothing too big should come out of nowhere. Unless it's like an organization emergency that something has just gone up in flames and everyone needs to kind of roll up their sleeves, there should not be like huge surprises. There might maybe something small comes up, and I try to kind of leave some bandwidth in our team, so that maybe we could help people more ad hoc or support certain users that were a bit stuck with some of the tooling that we had. And then the last strategy is about it's about also saying what your team priorities are and making sure that you get feedback. So when you define your team priorities, you get feedback from your team, but also from your stakeholders. So there's kind of an alignment that your priorities are aligned with the other teams. If they're all aligned, perhaps they're not going to be kind of saying, oh, I'm doing this thing, but I depend on you, and there's no way I can achieve it if we don't do this together. Okay, so if you have those priorities, we used to use the OKR, Objective Key Result Framework, okay, to kind of work on them and also measure what things we were doing and we were achieving them. That seemed to be quite effective, and I ended up on almost having my own personal objectives from that as well, so that I made sure that I was focused on the right things, because like everyone has said, like there's questions coming all over, and you're just sitting there thinking, oh gosh, how do I say no? So I felt that having the clear set of priorities and communicating them very often helped me be able to kind of explain if there was a no, a genuine no, and explain and give information as to why, and perhaps open a negotiation as to how, what is this impact on this? Would it be anyone else? Is there anyone in another data team that can kind of come and help, for a little bit on this? And I was kind of happy to this back and make people feel that we're in the same boat, instead of just saying a hard no and like out of my sight, which I don't think is a good thing. You need to have keep the good relationships in this.
That's awesome. Blanca, thank you so much for sharing. I think that many of the key themes that you mentioned come back to having a way to prioritize, having a way to set objectives that are aligned with the organization, and also communication once again, right? Like, how do you communicate effectively? What is the right way to say no? It's not just saying no for the sake of saying no. So it's essentially like saying yes to the right things in a way. And that's super powerful. And thank you so much for sharing. And Ellen, I know you wanted to add something to this one.
Yeah, echoing what Blanca said, one thing I found really effective was budget the time accordingly. So I knew that there was always something coming in. So I budgeted around 40% of the team's time just for ad hoc requests, and they would be prioritized. And the other thing I found really effective was to have not me doing the prioritization as such, leaning back to what I said earlier, but having the stakeholders amongst themselves prioritize what is most important, because that gave the bigger picture of what the organization is. And it wasn't necessarily me saying no, but it was maybe the head of marketing and the head of product debating about which thing of them is actually more urgent for the whole company. And then the last thing, which is again communication. Not just saying no, but also explaining what else could be done about the situation. Maybe we can take it on later. Maybe that still makes sense. Maybe somebody else can take it on. Maybe we can trade off something. Maybe we can do a reduced scope. So giving that fallback. And the small thing I found really effective was train my data analysts in particular in negotiation skills. Sebastian, you mentioned negotiation, and I found that just training them in negotiation so that they feel also comfortable if somebody approaches them directly, to either redirect it to me or to already have those negotiations, was really effective. So I wouldn't be the negotiation bottleneck.
That's amazing. And that creates higher bandwidth because you're empowering essentially the entire team to hold those conversations, which admittedly they're not trivial to hold, right? So it's essentially increases the transparency and increases the bandwidth of the entire team. That's pretty awesome, and that's a fantastic way for us to lean into our last topic, which is strategy or like aiming. So what I'd love to start the group thinking about or talking about is, now that we both have our team assembled and we have some semblance of how we work and how do we aim to achieve our objectives. So the next question that I have is like, how do you ensure that the data team is working on the right problem? So essentially, how do you align the work of your data team with your organization's mission? And perhaps like Tiffany can kick us off with some thoughts around how you've thought about this recently.
Yeah. I think once you have like a initial use case and you're getting started and you now have a team and you're making progress, I think one of the best things that you can do to ensure that you're continuing to solve the right problems is planning further ahead when it comes to a roadmap. Like, have a roadmap as a data team. I think that's important because you're going to find that as you're building out the roadmap that there are other components to what it's going to take to solve a particular problem or achieve something that's on the roadmap. Like, it may involve having to go back to more of the data engineering work or going back to data analytics to understand what the data is before we can really solve the problem. So you'll start to build out like little pockets of sort of themes of work, and then you can like essentially take each vertical or each kind of area that you need to focus in on and really help develop that, and ensure that, okay, given this theme of work is going to wrap into this larger picture and then it's going to wrap into the bigger organization, can we do like the check-ins? Can we tackle this in iterations and sprints, right? Like Alistair, Ellen, Blanca, you all talked about being careful not to lean too much into the processes, but then also being able, when it comes to strategy, to lean into the processes makes sense. And if you understand, and I think it's really important for data leaders to also understand like how this works at the organization outside of just your team. Like, how do other team leads and how do leadership collaborate, and how can you leverage that process to really get in there for your team as well? If there's something that is requiring you to work closely with another team, that's like, maybe it's cross-functional, cross-collaboration, in the very extreme sense of like, you don't know this person, they report into a whole different hierarchy in the company. You have to be able to really understand that process to be able to get in there ahead of time. It doesn't work to do that last minute because, then you're putting last minute deadlines on and stress on team members. So one thing that I like to do when it comes to strategy is make sure that I'm planning things ahead of time. And if that requires like scoping some things out or like letting my team know during sprint planning that, hey, this might come up and it might not come up for like another year, but just want to put this on your radar, I think that goes a long way.
That's fascinating, Tiffany. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I absolutely think that those strategies of like using the right level of process and to solve the right problems and like trying to navigate the organization and tying that to the mission of the organization are key to the success of a data team. And what I'd love to ask each and every one of you to touch upon is something that we already talked about at the very beginning. Is we talked about ensuring that everyone feels safe to make mistakes or to fail, right? So I'm gonna kind of twist it a bit, but I want to see if you have any thoughts on how do you create space on your teams for mission aligned work that evolves your product or evolves the company, like essentially technical evolution work that is mission aligned, but that can fail, that is risky, right? So what strategies do you have for that in your teams? And Alasdair, I'm going to start with you because I remember you mentioned it early on like ensuring that we have like the possibility to fail and to make experiments and make mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the ability to fail is not just evolutionary tasks. It's literally every task, right? Even the tasks that you think are the most basic, boring thing that shouldn't fail, they will fail. At some point, for some reason, they will fail. Everything should have scope to be able to fail at any point. And we shouldn't sit there, complaining at each other of why did that fail. Well, you need to get into why it failed and work out how you can do it better, but you shouldn't be sitting there blaming each other and going, oh, how could you fail on that kind of stuff? It doesn't matter. But I think, like the last couple of questions that we've spoken, like the answer is effectively the same thing for all of them. Fundamentally, it was like, why am I doing this? If you need to be able to say no to something, you need to understand why you're doing what you're doing, because that explains why you can't do that thing. And then, if you're making room for evolutionary things, you need to understand why. And to be honest, why is like the hardest question to answer. Everybody can work out what am I doing and how am I doing it, but it's so hard to answer why half the time. I feel like most tickets, most things that get raised with data teams never have a why. For most people, it's like, I'm working on this ticket, and nobody ever asks why. And so, yeah, I mean, for the previous question of saying no to things, it's you need to know why. And then for making space for evolutionary things, you need to know why. Because if you know the why, you can start to evaluate the importance of it. Should we make room for this? And because you can say no to the evolutionary things.
That's spot on. I think that is like hit the nail in the head, Alasdair. So not making safe space for experimentation. It's not only for technical evolution. It fits more broadly, and the why is key. Blanca, I'd love to hear from you as well.
I wanted to kind of almost circle this back, like Alasdair said, the previous question is almost answered, but circle this back to the culture of the team, having that safe space. And you as a leader in your data team have to kind of almost show them what is kind of an example of failing and kind of showing them the learning, because I think as you gain experience working, you learn a lot of things in different places, different teams, different companies, and we all have a bit of baggage, being honest, okay? And this it's not always felt safe to fail, okay? At least in my background, there's been times that I just didn't feel it was safe, okay? And it might have been on only like my own perception and not the actual thing, but I kind of went to subsequent jobs or companies with that baggage. So it's good to kind of keep showcasing that as leaders, because people need to remind that it's okay. You need to nurture the culture daily. Otherwise, it might just kind of, that feeling might just begin going away. The more people you add to the team, the culture kind of evolves. So I think if you have it, keep nurturing it, because I think it's what it sets people up for success. And also kind of have, when you do kind of show and tell with your stakeholders and your team also kind of present the work that they do, kind of always mention data experimentation and kind of communicate some risk in the work that you're doing. Like, hey, sometimes we just try out things and that's okay. To also kind of cascade that around so that everyone is kind of in the same thinking, that it's almost like more accepted.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that, Blanca. And I wonder if Ellen also has some like parting thoughts around aiming for our own strategy.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Alasdair and Blanca said. So to me, it all boils down to setting the right expectations across the entire organization, both to your stakeholders, to make sure, as Blanca mentioned, to make sure they understand that some things are experimental, and then understanding why they're experimental and what we try to hope to gain on it, and why they're risky, and why we can't just maybe guarantee that they will succeed, and then understanding why we take some time out of that. And the other thing around expectation is really I find the moment that when it's most crucial is when we talk about cultures is when actually something went wrong, and something will invariably go wrong, as Alistair mentioned, to make sure that the people are not punished in that moment, but that they really appreciate that it's okay that they failed and that we're learning something and we're moving ahead, and that's not the end of the universe.
That's perfect. That's awesome. And thank you for expressing it so crisply. And Tiffany, also some parting thoughts on the importance of strategy.
Yeah, I love what everyone said. I think it goes to show you that like progress is really non-linear in all of our teams. You know, you look kind of zoom out in the bigger picture over a period of time, and you're like, oh, that was progress. That was really good. But if you over-index on every day or every moment, it's a jagged line. Like there are some days when, you know, we're building things and it looks great, and the next day, oh, we realize like everything's gone to shit and we have to start over. And that just happens sometimes. And I think the one thing that I like to do on my team is I like to celebrate the wins. You know, I think it's important to you know, realize like, okay, when we mess up, that's just part of the learning process, and that gets to give us another chance for next time. And eventually we'll hit that like that success criteria, and that's when we can really celebrate. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do as well, in tandem with everything that the panelists shared.
That's fantastic. And I just wanted to say that this was extremely interesting and time flew by. We're at time. Thanks to all the panelists, honestly, for your perspectives. I learned a ton. I hope that folks in the audience did too. And I really, really want to bring it back to our initial point of putting together strategies to build like high performing and happy and effective data teams is important. And there's a lot more to discuss in this area. So thanks again to everyone joining us, to all the panelists. You're awesome. I learned a ton. I had a lot of fun. And please join us in the Effective Teams channel, Slack channel, and ask us some questions. We'll hang around in there for a bit. And thanks everyone for joining.